welcome to another Pink Talks with Europe Young Educators. My name's Georgia, I am one of your hosts. I am from beautiful New Zealand and I'm coming to you from Prague.
Hello from my side as well. I'm Valentina. I'm coming from Greece, but I have been living in Malta for a few years now and I love it. And I'm very happy to host two amazing people, and we're waiting for a third speaker. We can start by introducing you. I can introduce the Maltese part, which is Dr. Christopher Barbara. He's a psychiatrist, pro-choice activist, and a member of Doctor for Choice, which is an important organization that started a few years back, trying to advocate about women's reproduction rights. This is our main topic for tonight.
Very good. I'd love to introduce Terry Bellamack as well. She's the president of ALRANZ, which is Abortion Rights Aotearoa, which is, of course, New Zealand. Welcome, Terry.
Thank you.
So the topic of our talk today is A Tale of Two Countries, reproductive rights in New Zealand versus Malta. Why would we compare and contrast these two countries? They seem to have very little in common. Well, that's kind of the point. Recent abortion law changes in New Zealand have been very positive in terms of giving women and pregnant people the right to choose their futures, but the situation in Malta is unfortunately very different.
Yes, exactly. So I don't know if you want to start first to talk about themselves and their own country.
Very good. Chris, would you like to tell us a bit more about Doctors for Choice and your work in Malta?
Yes, so our organisation is a non-profit organisation registered in Malta. It was set up in May of 2019, and the main aim is to advocate for sexual and reproductive health and rights in the country, and specifically it aims to advocate for sexual education, free access to contraception, the decriminalisation of abortion, and the provision of abortion services once legal. So it's not just about abortion, it's about the whole gamut of reproductive rights. So our organisation has been quite active over the years. Over 2 years it's been set up, but unfortunately it is working in a country which is the laggard in Europe, and that's definitely the case to law at least. We currently, if we compare EU member states, we currently hold the unenviable position of the worst legislation when it comes to reproductive rights, specifically the choice of abortion. So as it stands, there is a blanket prohibition currently in force, which prohibits abortion in all circumstances. The law actually does not allow any exceptions whatsoever, not even to save the woman's life. And what happens in practice is that in cases where the woman's life is at risk, the doctors do terminate the pregnancy. And in their defense, even though not codified in the law, they say that we're acting according to the principle of double effect, which is actually not a legal principle. It's more of a moral principle where, in a nutshell, if you perform an action which is intended to save the woman's life, then if you indirectly end the pregnancy, that is morally permissible. But it's not actually codified in the law. All the criminal law of Malta says if you induce a miscarriage by whatever means, you face up to 3 years if you're the woman, or 4 years plus a revocation of your license if you're the medic. So the law is actually a blanket prohibition, and any act of terminating a pregnancy is illegal. So we've heard a lot about Poland recently and how the law got tightened to prohibit abortions in case of fetal anomaly. Not only is that prohibited in Malta, but even in cases where the pregnancy is a result of sexual crime, that's also prohibited. So we currently, for that reason, have the unenviable status of having the worst law in Europe, but we're hoping to change that, and we are starting to notice some cracks in the ceiling. We've had one independent member of parliament recently move a decriminalisation bill. We know it's probably not going to move forward because when one major party came out against it and the other party who was in government took on a kind of hands-off approach, which is kind of want to discuss this further. So we know that particular bill is probably not going to advance forward, but it did start to, it produced, so to speak, and we now are starting some cracks in, so to speak. So I'm hopeful that we'll more of it in the near future.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris, for that really good rundown of the situation as it stands at the moment. So we're comparing and contrasting against New Zealand, which last year had a law change with regards to reproductive rights. Terry, can you tell us about what the law was and what we changed to?
Sure, happy to. In this way, it's a bit of a similarity to Malta because before the law change, I suppose you could argue that New Zealand had the most conservative and worst abortion law in Oceania. No, that's probably not true. There are small islands that in Oceania that have worse laws, but for a large democracy, it was pretty bad. According to the old law in New Zealand, you needed two certifying consultants to sign off on your abortion before you could have it. And you could only receive an abortion if you met the grounds in the Crimes Act. These grounds did not include rape. They included some really offensive language about disabled people that I'm not going to even bother repeating here. Basically, 98% of abortions in New Zealand were granted on the mental health ground. So what that means in practice is that in order to get the abortion that you absolutely needed, you would have to tell the certifying consultants that you were actually very mentally fragile. People felt, you have to go and lie to doctors. This is not a normal thing. So yeah, the old law was pretty bad. The law was bad, but the practice, there was a kind of stasis that had existed since 1977 when the law had been passed. That's right, folks. Our abortion law before it changed in 2020 was almost 50 years old. The way it was applied worked out kind of that most people in New Zealand kind of got the abortions that they wanted, unless they happened to live in a rural area, because the service in rural areas was terrible because you had to drive to a hospital in an urban area. And that's not easy when you're living out on the land. And if you the uptake of medical abortion was very small because the way the law was written required you to go back twice to take the pills. So you would have to take the first set of pills and then go back the next day and take the next set of pills. And that, in New Zealand, where you could be hundreds of kilometers away from the abortion center, it was really not practicable. But last year we got law change, and now the law is much, much better. There is before 20 weeks, people have a right to an abortion now. Abortion has been decriminalized. It's been removed from the Crimes Act entirely. After 20 weeks, the abortion can still happen if the doctor in question, the doctor who's going to perform the abortion, believes that it is medically necessary and medically appropriate. So it's kind of good. It's a win. The one thing that we didn't get into the bill that we're working on now is safe areas. Safe areas are going to be very important because now that the law has been changed, anti-abortion forces in New Zealand, they haven't gone away. And now the battleground is not Parliament, it's the area right in front of the abortion clinic. And that's why we need safe areas.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Let's introduce Professor Isabel, who is a gynecologist, a pro-choice activist as well, and a member for Doctor for Choice in Malta. Would you like to introduce yourself and let us know some things about you, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Yeah, my name is Isabel. I am one of the doctors in Doctors for Choice. At this point in time, unfortunately, the only openly pro-choice gynecologist, although this will hopefully change, as Chris was saying, in the very near future. We do have a significant number of doctors in our group. I think that the last count, over 50 or so. It may not sound like a lot, but it is for us. Unfortunately, due to the situation in Malta, not all of them can be open about their beliefs and their practices. However, we do know that when in the privacy of their consultation room, they are doing the right thing. Sadly, of course, not all of them can, come out and say so. But nevertheless, it is happening behind the scenes, and very much as Chris mentioned, the situation is changing. It's frankly changing almost on a daily basis. We have, just to give you an example, I saw 4 women just on Thursday. I saw 4 women who came up and asked in a clinic, who came up and asked for an abortion, which is obviously they came because they know that they will be listened to, but nevertheless they are willing to come forward and actually ask for help. Chris may have mentioned, I'm not sure, I was a little late, I apologize, coming from my clinic, but he may have mentioned that about a year ago, just under a year ago, we set up a what we're calling a family planning advisory service, but actually we provide not only family planning, but also advice on frankly any issue that relates to reproductive health care. And as a result, we've been literally inundated with calls and chats and messages requesting information about abortion. Chris may also have mentioned that our website in Malta, our Doctors for Choice website, is frankly very good in my limited view, in the sense that if you search for information about abortion in Malta, which it remains completely illegal to achieve one, you will find the information. It's there. People will know how to access the pills online. They know what the pills will do, how they work, what to expect, what kind of complications they might have. So, we are at the moment in a let's provide as much information as we possibly can phase, while at the same time working as hard as we can through the political framework, because there is no question that is the only way we are ever going to be able to change things. Okay, we have, as Chris mentioned, 2 major political parties, neither of which have openly come out and said that we would like to at least discuss abortion. So it's not on their at least not on their short-term agenda. Even though we will likely have an election next year, but it is changing. It is changing. We have an MEP, a member of the European Parliament, who actually voted in favor, a Maltese MEP, I should say, who actually voted in favor of the Matic report and openly said so and wasn't afraid of coming out and being clear about it. 2 others abstained, which is the Maltese way of saying, I agree with you, but I won't show exactly what I think. And then the others, yes, unfortunately, the other 3 or so are, utterly conservative and they will never change. But what I think, I'm a born optimist, but I must admit that in my short, life within this pro-choice movement, I think we've seen the situation improve in terms of the ability of women to acquire the information they need to make a decision. It remains, unfortunately, entirely illegal, which does cause some issues when it comes to, for example, reaching out for medical care in the public health system if something goes wrong with your abortion. So we literally have to tell women, please, you go to the hospital, you're bleeding heavily, more than, whatever the limits are. You need to tell them you're having a miscarriage. which is true. So we're having to play these games, these deception games, so that women can get the health care they really need. I also want to mention two other quick points that are related more to prevention of abortion, if you like, and that is that Doctors for Choice firmly believes in not only comprehensive sexual education in schools, which we do not have. Our schools primarily practice, or rather profess and proclaim, abstinence as the most effective form of birth control. And of course, the second is the availability of contraceptives on our essential medicines list, which they are not available. So women have to pay for the contraceptive pill or the IUD or Depo or whatever. They actually have to pay for it, and usually out of their own pocket. This is not acceptable. If we want, especially in a country where abortion is entirely legal. And one last but equally important point is that although the morning after pill is available and legally accessible without a prescription, there's still a significant number of pharmacists who are conscientious objectors and who will refuse not only to dispense the morning after pill if they have it, but they will not even refer to a nearby clinic, a nearby pharmacy that will do so. So these are other aspects that we are, trying to work on to improve the situation.
Thank you, Chris. And Isabel, I just wanted to ask you, what do you think are some of the reasons why Malta has such a strict abortion law, why it is so seemingly politically impossible at the moment to envisage changing?
Yes, well, this is probably a relic of our Catholic upbringing. I mean, in our constitution, it says that the Roman Catholic Church is the I don't know how it's phrased exactly. Chris might know, but that it is the church of the state. So, and historically, the older people on the island are staunchly Catholic. So that's part of the reason. The other part of it, I think, is that it's a bit of a hot potato. Nobody wants to lose a vote by admitting that they believe this is a good thing for the population, because this is what it will essentially translate into. If either of the parties, the two main political parties, were to say that we believe in choice, it's not about being pro-abortion, but being pro-choice, they will simply lose literally thousands of votes, which they're not prepared to do. Sad.
Yeah. Exactly. No, you're absolutely right. And I would like to ask you about actually not to ask. I want to mention, because you told us about the website that it's amazing. I believe it's amazing too. It's not only you that you believe this, and I think especially during the pandemic, it helped a lot of women because we couldn't travel. Borders were closed. Airport obviously closed. We have only one airport. It's a small nation. So I think it helped a lot of women and people, pregnant people, during that time, in order to, they couldn't travel, in order to have an abortion at home. I don't know if you have been approached by women during the lockdowns, if you had to, address the issue, because usually people travel, and this is how the Maltese law addresses the issue. We don't do abortions here. Do whatever you want outside of the border.
Yes. As Chris puts it very well, we import solutions and export our problems. I think that's a very valid way of looking at it. So, in a way, in a perverse sort of way, the pandemic, which is not a good thing, but the pandemic has essentially opened our eyes to telemedicine. So women were not able to travel, although I will tell you that a few women did travel, women who had, very few, but a few women with fatal fetal anomalies, which are only diagnosed at, later in pregnancy, and, we're beyond medical abortions now. A few of them did manage to get to the UK, because the borders were not entirely closed. In fact, there were flights from Malta to the UK every day. The problem was actually coming back. repatriation. Why did you leave? Well, I left because I had an urgent medical problem that could not be solved on the island, which is true. And so, coming back, okay, well, anyway, so that was more of an issue. But going back to the pandemic, it's basically meant that women in Malta now realize through our website, and here I must tell you, in case you didn't know, that it's Chris Barbara, whom you're speaking to now, who actually runs the website. And he is entirely responsible for not only the beauty of it, I think it's beautiful, but also the content. Okay, but I think
Chris, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. As
it really is a fantastic site. So the pandemic basically meant that now women in Malta, when they search for information like abortion in Malta, our website comes up. It's either number 1 or number 2. And when it's 1, it's great. When it's 2, we I don't know what, Chris does some magic, and then it suddenly becomes number 1 again. So this means now that the word is out. The word is out. People speak to each other. The other thing that has happened, which is, I think, really important, is a group of young activists have created a website called Break the Taboo, whereby they have collected over the last 2 years or so stories, anonymous, mostly anonymous, not all, but stories of women in Malta who have had abortions. And again, we've now had them translated into Maltese, which makes a difference, a big difference, because people like to read things in their own language. And I encourage any person who comes and talks to me about maybe considering an abortion to take a look at those stories, because they are really quite powerful. Some of them are, well, as you can imagine, they're heart-rending, really amazing.
And Terry, I think that you can speak to Abort the Stigma as a New Zealand sort of version of that. And that was set up before the law change, wasn't it?
Yeah, we did set that up before the law change, and it's a blatant ripoff of In Her Shoes, the Irish site. And its purpose is just to tell the stories of people who have experienced abortion care here in New Zealand. And it was huge in terms of, getting stories out there, getting people used to the idea that they can take that chance, feeling maybe a little bit safer about it. I really can't emphasize enough how important the courage of people who have, stepped out of their comfort zone and told the story of their abortion has been to this whole struggle here in New Zealand. The media have been quite helpful in, moving, they've published a lot of these stories, and they're also a source of stories because they come up with things, that we haven't heard of. And it's broken a logjam in the minds of people, I think. Everyone before knew someone who had had an abortion, but they didn't know how hard it was. They didn't know that they had to lie. That was something that didn't really come out until later in the piece when we were trying to change the law. And a lot of the stories on Abort the Stigma are about, conscientious objection on the part of doctors, doctors who yelled at people, doctors who, who slut shamed women trying to get abortions, basically. The people, how people felt when they had to lie to their doctors. One of the other things that New Zealand, that we did here in New Zealand, was we started up a case with the Human Rights Commission. This was before law change was really on the horizon. It was before Jacinda was even elected. But we brought together a bunch of people who had experiences with the abortion system in New Zealand, and we complained about that as being discriminatory. And it was moving towards the Human Rights Review Tribunal as the law was passed. So at that point, it became moot, of course. But one of the women in that case had been denied an abortion because, not because she was out of time, but basically because she was really close. And that, you know, that made the papers. It was a huge story here, and it, you know, it's just unconscionable. People could no longer lie to themselves that this sort of thing didn't happen here in New Zealand.
Thank you. Thanks for your input. It's nice to hear the other side, another Icelandic nation who actually managed to pass. I want to ask Dr. Chris first. You mentioned before about Poland, and we know about Polish law, abortion law, about how they tightened the law. Why do you think people are not aware about the Maltese law, which is even worse? And why not people don't talk about that? Do you have any perspective, any idea about this? Okay, and what do you think about the media role in the terms of? Do you think they're pro-choice? They are pro-choice, but they hide it as politicians do. You think that most of the media is conservative? What?
Okay. Are you okay, Chris, or shall I go on? Okay, so in terms of the media, as Chris is saying, there's the political parties have their own media, and those are totally biased one way or the other. So you can may as well ignore them. However, there are two or three English commenting on the articles that Chris publishes, that we publish in the papers. Not all the comments are are the kind of comments we would like to see. In fact, I will tell you, I just recently concluded a case. I had to take one of my fellow academics. I'm a professor at the university. One of my fellow academics wrote a comment under an article I wrote a few weeks ago, where he called me criminal, delinquent, and unnatural. And that was just a tad too much. I mean, I really don't care what people think, to be honest. But when you start calling people names with no basis, because when I met him, I said, well, if you think so, then please report me to the police, which of course, he didn't do. But in any case, that case has just been concluded with an apology from his side, because he had no choice. But this is the kind of situation we're in, where people will fire out anything they want online because they feel that they can do so. So they will call us anything from murderers to shredders of babies and all of this stuff. But it's all blank speak. It's useless speak, because it doesn't get them anywhere. It doesn't get us anywhere, What we really need in the media, from the media, is debate, proper debate, where we don't have to disagree with each other in a negative manner, but we can, patiently and professionally and calmly discuss different points of view. That hasn't happened yet. It's happening in very small areas. For example, the students at the university have organized, these types of debates, and they're being very successful. Successful in the sense that there was a lot of engagement, a lot of student engagement. And that's where we need to go. I mean, the reality here is that Doctors for Choice is not enough. Sure, we exist, we fill a particular, space, which is great, but we need much more than that, and we particularly need the younger students, the younger future doctors, future nurses, future healthcare professionals, future anything really, and then our next elections, which are coming up in the next 6 months or so, will be open to 16-year-olds and above. And the only age group in which we have seen a significant change because we've had a couple of surveys done, is in fact in that 16 to 25-year-old age group. Those young people are beginning to change their minds, and that's what we need. We need more of those, and they're the ones that will be voting coming up next elections, and of course after that. So that's one of the reasons why we strongly believe that we need to work very hard through social media to reach those younger people.
Yes,
Fantastic.
it's amazing. No, sorry, Georgia, please.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you. Terry, I was wondering because, New Zealanders were successful in getting a liberalisation, a complete decriminalisation of abortion, even though, as you said, functionally most people were already able to access if they needed to. Obviously, there were problems with it. Do you think that there's anything that other countries can kind of learn from what worked and what didn't work for New Zealand, or do you think that it's maybe just kind of a bit down to demographics? Because I'll note, for example, I looked at some statistics. Malta is 90% Christian, with 83% being Roman Catholic, whereas over 50% of New Zealanders identify as no religion, or they don't say that they have a religion. And New Zealand is quite an individualistic kind of society, which, talking to Valentini before this started, I don't think that's quite the same in Malta. So, Terry, do you think there's things that can be copied overseas, or do you think that it's a little bit too much to do with the starting point?
Well, you're absolutely right that the starting point is different in New Zealand. We are, demographically very different from Malta, very different from really any other place in the world. I believe we top the charts in terms of percentage of population that has no religion or adheres to no religion. And that's huge. It would not be exaggerating to say that, the population was out ahead of the elites and the politicians and, those who govern us. But that's been the case really in New Zealand since the beginning. Not many people know that after the the Contraception, Abortion, Sterilization and Abortion Act, was passed in 1977, the people started up a petition to have it repealed immediately, like in 1978. And that petition garnered more signatures than I believe any other petition that's ever been presented to Parliament. It received 326,000 signatures. And just to put that into perspective, In New Zealand, the population at the time was around 3.5 million. So 10% of not just the voters, but 10% of the population signed this petition to repeal the Contraception, Sterilization, and Abortion Act back as soon as it was passed. But nothing ever came of that. I think one of the there is one part of how it all came down in New Zealand that might help other places, possibly even Malta. But Malta really sounds like a hard case, and really major props and maximum respect to you folks who are working that beat. That's a really hard case. But one of the things that I think helped in our case was that we worked to try and make it safe for politicians to come out in favor of abortion rights. And the way we did that was to mobilize polling, to mobilize people to come and stand in front of Parliament and yell. Rallies in front of Parliament, marches, to Parliament, rallies all around the country. These were all tactics that we used to demonstrate that, oh yeah, there are a lot of people in New Zealand who support abortion rights, and this made it safer for politicians to come out and say what they needed to say. And I think this created a certain cachet. People, politicians wanted to speak at our rallies soon enough. And that was a good shift. And when that shift happened, it was clear that, this was really the change was going to come.
Very good point.
I feel like I heard something.
Well, it was a very good point, actually. And I was wondering if this could work in Malta. I think politicians here in Malta believe that the majority who are pro-choicers are foreigners, like me, for example, that we actually do not vote in the country, even if we have been living here for some years. I mean, unless you get the citizenship, they don't really care, about the actual people. So I don't know if this could work here, but maybe Professor Stabil has a different perspective to that, because you talk with more people and probably you are into politicians more than me as a foreigner.
Well, maybe yes, maybe not. But you are right, of course. There, coincidentally, many pro-choice people on the island who are locals have foreign-sounding names, either because, like me, it's sort of a family thing. People emigrate. We're a polyglot. We're not polyglot. Sorry, we're a. It's an island. People come and people go. So either that, or there are people who've married locals or changed names. So it's very true that, unfortunately, there is this tendency to believe that, in fact, that this whole process is being driven by a few bloody foreigners. This is not true at all. It is absolutely untrue. And the stories on Break the Taboo will prove that. The letters online, the responses to our articles. Yes, there are a few people who write with foreign-sounding names, and so what? I mean. But the vast majority of pro-choice people on the island are locals, because we outnumber the foreigners, as it were, even though they're very welcome. But there is this misunderstanding, this idea that it is driven by that a pure Maltese person would never push for something as abhorrent as shredding a baby, or whatever the words things that they call us. But it's not true at all. It's not true at all.
So you believe that something like this could work to make actually politicians feel safer in an environment that okay, if we speak up or if we vote in favor, we won't be politically dead in the next election. Do
I,
you think that this?
I wish
I
it
met
was.
the rally that you did 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, and I was there, and I was very surprised that something like that happened in Malta because, it was the first one, and but at the same time, some pro-lifers were kind of protesting at the other side of the capital, because they knew that the rally was going on. So I think things can be a bit tense here, which I feel it was not the case in New Zealand. I think many people were more open to discuss and to talk about that. Yes, please.
Yeah, our opposition was kind of out there too, and they used to get a lot more media than they do now. But yeah, it was. They say the same things. They try to fight the same battle, and it's interesting because I think it's all coming from the same place. It's coming from a place of trying to stop the world from moving forward. Trying to hold on to the past, and that I think is a similarity not only between New Zealand and Malta, but all over the world. It's the anti-choice movement is very retrograde, and here in New Zealand and in other places, it's time itself will bowl them over. Yeah, just wanted to throw that in.
I think in many ways, though, it is absolutely no surprise that there are these exact same talking points coming up, even in such incredibly different countries as New Zealand and Malta, and when we're discussing such incredibly different changes that would need to be made. I mean, you could argue that New Zealand was a lot more of a tweak compared to what needs to happen in Malta. But in New Zealand, at least, we saw interference from overseas right to life groups. They tend to sort of go anywhere in the world anywhere and everywhere in the world and try and stick their fingers into the local debate with misinformation and smear campaigns and very emotive talking points. Isabel, you said something about, shredding babies. I mean, it's just fiction, but it's so emotive and it works so well. Have you seen much interference from outside groups like Life Network or Right to Life or any of these in Malta?
Yes, we have. One of the most vociferous groups, anti-choice groups, as we like to call them, is called Life Network. Not only are they associated with Agenda Europe, which is pretty much a far-right extremist group, but they also receive funding from the government, which is totally, it's totally obnoxious, frankly. Now, what is really horrible about what they do is that it's a lie. Essentially, they lure women, unsuspecting women, through their website to come and talk to them, and there they waste their time, as it were, back and forth, to and fro. Let's think about this, let's talk about this, and so on, until it really is quite late. By the time women have realized that this is not a help site at all, that they are being deceived and they're being fed facts which are not facts. They've even been told that if they've started a medical abortion, it can be reversed. There's absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. Nevertheless, these people are out there, and their spokesperson is on TV every other day, on the newspapers, in online, talking about what the wonderful work they do with mothers to protect them and to help them have their children, and so on and so forth, which of course may well be true. I mean, we don't know, but the reality is that they are not providing the kind of support that you would expect women to be given. In other words, all the options. I am pro-choice, and I must admit that I'm also pro-abortion, but never will I say to a woman as a doctor, here's how to have an abortion. Goodbye. That's not how it works. We've got to provide options. We have to tell them everything, and then they choose, right? Choice. And we provide the pros and cons of each option, and we talk about support services that are available, because this is essentially a socialist state. We do have a very well-funded, reasonably well-funded social services. But nevertheless, if a woman does not want to continue with a pregnancy, why should she be tricked and fooled into doing so? So, short answer, yes, we do have at least one group, and there are probably others, that are actively working against the pro-choice movement, and have strong connections with international groups that are, not to put too fine a point on it, evil. There's only one word for people like that. I'm sorry, it's not a very nice thing to say, but this is evil behavior, because they are not providing all the information, and that is our job, surely, as doctors, as healthcare providers. That's what we must do, is provide all the information and help women then make the decision that they want to make. It's not up to us.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the word was not harsh enough. I think there are even
You've
words.
got one word for me, have you?
Yeah, like to describe this kind of, I don't know, attitude, behavior. I think it should be, goes against the law if you purposefully provide the false or half of the information that actually they fall into your agenda. I think Dr. Barbara wants to add something. I saw your hand up before.
Yes, that was very briefly. Apologies if I get cut off again. I'm having some connection problems. And that's precisely what inspired me to work on the website so much. And it takes a lot of time to maintain. But basically, it's an information war. And so what we had previously was these anti-choice, pro-life, as they call themselves, groups, basically telling people misinformation. And as Isabel said, it was mostly to delay them past gestational limits in other countries. And also, if you read, for example, the section on emergency contraception, it contains lies which says things like it may cause an abortion. If you suspect you're pregnant, you should take a pregnancy test before you use them, which is all rubbish. But it's all intended to discourage people from not just having abortions, but even using contraception. It's kind of it's all part of their agenda, which is not just about abortion. It's a whole mentality which spans across the civil rights spectrum. These same people are also vehemently against any kind of equality for LGBTI groups, for example, any loosening of, for example, civil divorce laws, which as they see it, break down the traditional family. They're also anti-gender. They do not like sort of acknowledging, let alone recognizing in law, that some people do not fit the male-female stereotype. They're against progress, as Terry mentioned earlier. They're all about trying to hold the world back. And this is something we're seeing locally as well, which is a shift from a more Catholic church-driven opposition to abortion to a more of these far-right, ideologically driven groups trying to hold back progress. But coming back to information, so we wanted to put an end to that as an organisation. And that's one of the things that we feel very strongly about. And there is case law from the European Court of Human Rights which says even if basically abortion is illegal in a country, women have a right to information about abortion overseas in other member states of the EU. So we basically give very clear information on our website, not just about how to access abortion abroad, but even from a harm reduction point of view, how to access telemedicine services which we think are safe. So we are of the opinion, having also liaised with who runs these services, that some services, for example, those of women on web, are safe. And we think that they meet at least the 2020 revised WHO criteria for safe abortion and self-management of abortion, which states now clearly that both abortion pills can be taken at home without direct medical supervision in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. And we know that these online telemedicine services, they ask the relevant medical questions, they issue prescriptions, and they send authentic medicines. And we also know that being a small country, everyone can reach hospital in 60 minutes or less, and healthcare is good. So if people do present with complications, they can say they're having a miscarriage and they receive the care they need. So we think there is the opportunity to have a safe abortion, but it's not ideal because it's illegal and we still want the law changed. We want this to be not provided underground. We don't want the threat of criminal sanctions against women. We want this to be legal and provided for free by the state.
Thank you for your input and your effort. Actually, we really appreciate it as women in Malta. It's an extremely important work, and someone had to do at some point. Thank you. I would like to ask about New Zealand sexual education, since we are talking that we're talking about not only about abortion but also about prevention of the abortion. And I would like to ask if there is sexual education in school, because I honestly do not know if something changed after the law changed as well. I mean, if I don't know, you put a new class, a new lesson in the class, something like that, or if nothing has changed after the law changed.
It was actually pretty well. It hasn't really changed after the law changed because it's basically driven by the school itself. Schools are run by trustees, and the trustees can decide on a lot of things that they probably shouldn't be deciding on. But some schools have great sexual education and relationship education, and they give kids the straight dope about contraception, and yes, you can get an abortion. That said, however, there is one aspect of the law in New Zealand that's always been really good, and that is the care of children. If a teen is old enough to become pregnant, she's old enough to consent to an abortion herself. So we haven't ever had to deal with the nonsense of parental notification and parental consent around abortion, and that is still the case. So that's good. And kids can, contraception is freely available to anyone under 22, and that too is a huge thing. But again, it's available from family planning, which is great if you're in a town that has a family planning. If you're out in the rural areas where that doesn't exist, it's much more difficult to access, and that's not so good. But yeah, in terms of education around sexuality, there's a lot of room for improvement, I think, everywhere.
Fantastic. Thank you, Terry. So we run the risk of feeling a little bit sort of doom and gloom here. But Isabel and Chris, is there anything that people watching can do? What can we do to help the women of Malta? We don't live there, and as you said, it's maybe a problem, this feeling from within Malta that it's foreigners driving it. So maybe if we try and help the wrong way, we could end up hurting. What would you like to see the international community do?
Well, I'll start that. Realistically, every article about Malta that is published in an international journal, magazine, newspaper, online portal, where Malta and the word abortion, illegal, decriminalization are in the title somewhere, would be very, very helpful. In other words, we need to spread the word. I mean, we are number one, in Europe for criminalizing women who've had an abortion. I mean, that's ridiculous in this day and age. That is where we are. So I think publicity, online, offline, any way you possibly can, publicity so that we name and shame. I think it's the only way. We need to be shown up as the pariahs of Europe. Not the world, of course, because there are worse, perhaps worse places in the world to live. But if you're a woman and in need of free contraception, 24/7 availability of the morning after pill, and obviously sexual education, as well as, hopefully abortion if you needed it, you're in the wrong place. You're in a wrong country, because you ain't going to get that. And this is serious. Can you imagine a young woman, and maybe not so young, but any woman from the time she becomes sexually active to the time she goes through the menopause has to pay for her own contraception. And it's not cheap. This is not available, and it's not continuously available either. So you maybe find yourself perfectly settled on a particular pill, and then 2 weeks, 2 months, 3 months later, it's not available anymore, and you have to try again. So this is not a good place to be if you are in that situation. I think advertising, publicity, please, that would be very helpful. I don't know, Chris, if you wanted to add anything.
No, not really. Just basically what's been said already. Just raising awareness, and when the time comes, and we again are faced with the prospect of law change, to help us spread the word and give us support.
One other thing that really helped in the New Zealand context was the dominoes falling. When Ireland passed the repeal of Amendment 8, that was huge. That having that happen, it was it hit New Zealand, the news. It hit the news in a big way, and that got New Zealand moving, I think, in some respects, because who wants to be worse than Ireland? Who wants to have a worse abortion law than Ireland? Back at that time, it was. I think that too was spurred things on. But the point I'd like to make about that is that every time there's liberalization anywhere, you're absolutely right. It's another brick out of the wall, and hopefully, that too needs to be publicized in Malta. We're happy to run all the articles that we can get about what's going on in Malta, here in New Zealand, on our Facebook page, Alran's Facebook page. You're absolutely right. It's really important to talk about, and the more we talk about them, not just the bad but also the good, I think the more cracks in the foundation of patriarchy that we can place.
Yes, that's true, and that's why we organize this, because personally I'm very passionate about the topic. I found it completely unfair. Coming also from a country that abortion is legal and not question asked when needed. I think we all gave extremely important information and vital information about what's going on in these two sides of the world. Georgia, do you want? And sorry, and also the word patriarchy finally got on the table, because I think behind everything is that people want to control women's bodies and lives, and this is actually, abortion is another icing on the cake. It's not the only thing, and I think Pink Talks really light the situation up. I don't know, Georgia, if you have any more questions.
No, I think we've had a really good discussion. I want to really thank Isabel and Chris for the bravery of your work. I know that it can, as you said, it can make you a little bit unpopular. Hopefully Terry hasn't had to face too much of that, but I know that it's impossible for you to do this work without getting some sort of negative feedback from people who don't want women and people who can get pregnant to have autonomy over their bodies and their lives. And yeah, hopefully you can maybe feel a little bit more supported. People around the world do see you. I became aware of the Maltese situation through Alran's, one of the most visible aspects of Alran's work is an incredibly active Facebook page that basically pretty much seems to run every single story about reproductive rights around the world. So maybe that's something that can work in Malta as well, so that more Maltese young people can see that, hey, this isn't normal. This is actually really, really unusual. I don't know, but I want to thank our guest very much. Terry, was there anything else that you wanted to add?
Yeah, basically, you raised a very important point because most of the Maltese people I was speaking like 2-3 years ago, they didn't really think that this is unusual. They think that, okay, I mean, it doesn't happen everywhere or pretty much everywhere, besides maybe some very progressive countries like in Scandinavia, or, they had this kind of feeling that normal, so it doesn't come out of the thin air. Everybody has the same rights. But yeah, and they were surprised that well, this is actually extreme. No, we can have abortion if we have to or if we want to, without having to be in the prison. And by the way, I want to ask if you have heard about any woman being imprisoned the last years. I think the last case that the woman in prison was like 10 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, or I don't know if I'm completely wrong with that. So I forgot to ask this important question, I think.
Yeah, so very briefly, thankfully, not recently. So I don't think the problem is when it comes to record keeping, because things change over the years and different systems of keeping records of court sentences change. But I think there hasn't been a recorded effective jail term for abortion in the last 25 years, and there hasn't been anyone charged with having an abortion or having procured an abortion in the last 5 years. So that's where we are. I think that's twofold. One is the difficulty of investigating abortions and the invasiveness of requesting tests to prove that somebody was pregnant, and there is a lot of case law that prohibits invasiveness without going through a lot of legal hoops with the court. So a lot of times the police just abandon investigations. The other one is, I'm pretty sure there is a reluctance within the political class as well as the law enforcement powers that be to investigate such cases, because they know that even in Malta that will generate a lot of negative publicity. And we've had a case of a court withholding the travelling rights of a woman because her estranged partner last year made an allegation which was false, that she was intending to travel for an abortion, and that created a furore across the country, and we were taken by surprise. Even we did not expect such a reaction, and the judge had to revise that decision within 24 hours, and she had her passport back. So that was positive. So yeah, thankfully there are positives, and the situation on the ground is that currently, thankfully, a lot of women and girls still are able to access some form of safe abortion if they need it.
Very good, thank you. Well, we can complete this online talk. If you don't have anything to add, or if you don't have any other comments, we're happy to hear. We're happy to talk for hours for this topic, but we don't want to, overuse your time. If anybody wants to add something, or Georgia, if you want to do a question, the last question or something.
No, I think that's a good place to leave it. Thank you very much to all of our guests for joining us today. And thank you especially for giving us a call to action and how we can help without sort of being seen to interfere and making things worse. So I think that there's something that we can all sort of do, with the goal in mind that if we just raise awareness as much as possible outside of Malta, then at least we can help in some small way.
Thank you very, very much for inviting us. This was a real pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Good discussion.
All right. Thanks very much. We will sign off there. So have a good day for you, Terry, and evening for you, Chris and Barbara. And we will see you next time on the next Pink Talk with a different topic, different speakers, different guests, but the same feminist take on the issues of the day. So thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.